Okay, here we go. Week number 6. We're going over Lobdell and Margolin. Margolin, I found her stuff really. It was an interesting take. Obviously, all of this stuff is revolving around method acting and the method. And she has an interesting take on it that's uniquely hers. And once again, I found myself going, okay, so everybody's got a hybrid version of this, but everybody's claiming that if you don't do it the way that originally it was meant to be done, then you're not going to be as effective. And yet everybody's doing a new version of it, including the director that I grew up with in my high school was doing his version of it. And it turns out that I was at the theaterist workshop with Phoebe Brand and she was doing her version of it. So it's clearly open to interpretation within guidelines, right? So we're all kind of agreeing that this is the method and you can't vary much on it, but then each one of the masters has varied on it, and then as it gets passed on the line. But specifically with Margolin, I thought that she brought up a couple things which I put in writing that I thought were really good analogies or storytelling to sort of explain the difference between what is acting and what is reacting, or at least that's the way I always phrase it. So she uses the fire drill. That analogy works really well. That the fire drill is the repetition, it's the plan, it's the force, it's rehearsed, it has to be, and this is the way it's done. Whereas the reacting, the honest acting, the authenticity comes from if there's a real fire. So you could argue that, in fact, in some ways, the drilling that you do to be prepared to be open to be an open actor is actually sort of forced and formulaic, and it's sort of acting, which is probably why the Meisner exercise of repeatedly saying the same things over and over and over and over and over again until the emotion drives the words as opposed to the words driving the emotion. I think I got that right. I have to think about it. But the fact that it should become organic, it's more about listening than it is about talking. It's about reacting. So I like the fire analogy because it really is. I mean, as an ex-EMT, as somebody who served in the United States Coast Guard and the U.S. military, you can drill all you want, and it's pretending. Um, it's pretending to that by principle how to do CPR. It's pretending that you know how to whatever it is that you're drilling on, and therefore that's acting. But when you're really doing CPR on somebody and their ribs are really cracking, under your weight, it's a completely different experience. It's real and it's reacting to that event, and there's nothing like it. But you have to do. I'm going to argue, and I think Margolin is saying this. Certainly, Meisner is that you have to do the drilling, otherwise you're not going to be ready for the real thing. You're not going to be open to the real thing. You're not going to be prepared for it when it comes. You're not going to handle it, and then it's going to be out of control and not repeatable. So that was one of my takeaways with Margolin. She's taking the position that acting is a particular heightened way of living for an hour or two, and I agree that you have to have done the training to be able to be prepared to perform the task, and the task is complicated and has to be reactive and has to be repeatable. So she's really playing here with the idea of acting and reacting. And I like the fact that she used the Strasberg quote in her piece as well, as that how can I paint unless I'm willing to confuse my own feelings with what I'm doing? We think about art that way. So you have to look at the materials, you have to look at the brushes, you have to look at the colors, but then you have to match your feelings to the storytelling, to the mechanics of how it has to be done. And all of those must be intertwined. Otherwise, it simply isn't possible. Um, so exposing yourself in the character is just comes with the territory of being an actor, and then knowing how to control that and use that becomes part of your bag of tools. Um, so then I guess she boldly states that, can you bring this life to character or not? And the answer is, you can act it out, but that's not bringing it to life. You have to be able to reach inside and actually use everything you have, including your own background, um, to react to what's going on at that moment, in that moment, while using the mechanics of following a script. And there it is. And what were my takeaways? Oh, I've come to the same conclusion that, of course, everything is hybrid. It really is. Um, and I also came to the conclusion that although everybody who was on the Meisner train says that, it's 100% Meisner or not, and if it's not 100%, it's a failure, I disagree. I think you can have hybrid versions of Meisner. You can apply them and not have it be 100%. But that doesn't mean you don't need to follow the method to get to that. It just means that there are options. Um, and I noted that at no time Margolin suggested creating something that was not repeatable. So she's taking a different approach to reach authenticity, but she is saying that it must be repeatable. So she's not going off the rails there. All right, let's move on to our friend Mr. Lobdell. Maybe I'm just going to jump to my takeaways because you read the papers and you're the only one who's going to be watching this. Although, who knows, a couple students might catch the tail end. Conceptually, a symbiotic relationship should exist between requirements, the set pieces and stuff, and the imaginary. So that's the whole idea that the table's obviously there. It's physically there. It doesn't need to be imagined. But that doesn't mean that also it has to be. Oh, and I talked about this actually in my paper. That one of the things that Sidney Lemay was having problems with is he was working with actors who had no formal training like this, and they could not imagine him saying they're at a bar, but there was a regular table that they were rehearsing with. So, there you go. And yet LeMay isn't really necessarily a big fan of theater being real, and he thinks film is much more authentic in its portrayal. Having said that, he wants his actors to be trained as if that rehearsal table is the real bar as far as rehearsal is concerned, and should play it that way. The symbiotic relationship between the two is clear. I think that just about everybody I've worked with uses that. I don't know anybody. Well, I've seen bad acting. I shouldn't say that. I've seen plenty of bad acting where there's no imagination and it is just the script and heightened bad acting, and the table is whatever the table needs to be. It represents nothing else but that. So there's my take on that. The method is all about, okay, relaxation enhances concentration, which is essential. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, your body is your instrument. I mean, we've all heard that cliche a million times. And if your body is not relaxed and it is not ready to be fully engaged and focused and concentrated, as it were, on the materials, on the physicality of it, if it's not ready for all of that, the performance is not going to be there. So I think enough said about that. I can't imagine anybody in theater disagreeing with me about that, but I suppose they're probably out there somewhere. That somehow this is all too regimented for them. And actors who effectively use the method are continually honing and using their skills. Well, I just said that. They are gathering memories, experiences, and future. Yeah, it's one of my problems. I will elaborate a little on this before I come to a conclusion, which is it's one of the problems with being a director of middle school or high school theater. Is we're starting to introduce them to these principles, but they don't have anything to draw on. So it's really hard to get them to the level. It's interesting. We read a lot about childhood actors. A few of the people that I wrote about in my paper were childhood actors. Karnofsky was a childhood actor. LeMay was a childhood actor. And yet we're now talking about the importance of the method, and anybody who thinks that those kids were using the method is out of their mind. I mean, they hadn't been through any training. They just look good on film, or they look good on stage, and they could create a reasonably good character. So it's tough when we're talking about gathering memories and experiences. You have to do it as an actor. It's incredible, and yet it is possible to put on a decent performance without a lot of prior knowledge of the world, of memories. Um, I had the problem once. I'll tell the quick story where I had a kid who was playing Barnum in Barnum, and there's a point in the show that's really poorly written. Actually, it's unclear that Charity dies, his wife dies, and she just sort of has written the script to fade away. She just goes away, like boom, and then all of a sudden, scene transition, and these two politicians are saying we're pulling our support of you for running for Senate or whatever he was running for. And that's it. If the audience blinks, they don't know she died. She just disappears. And there was a song that they had originally written for the show that was called "So Little Time," and they dropped it. And I cheated when I found it, and I put it back in the show because it makes absolute sense. Because they're sitting, Charity and PT are sitting on the front steps of the Bridgeport Town Hall, City Hall, and that song plays, and then she disappears. So the song made absolute sense, and I'm not quite sure why the creative team cut it. And it's a beautiful song, so I had some friends orchestrate it, and we only played it on the piano, which made it even more beautiful. And we put it in because there was no place. But back to this, so the kid had to act that his wife just died, and politicians are screaming at him at the same time. And I said, "Have you had any loss in your life?" And the answer was no. No, grandparents are still alive. Yes. Parents are still alive. Yes. I mean, here I am trying to pull anything that I can get emotional at this kid. Dog that died. And the answer was no. He's got nobody. He's got nobody that's died in his family, grandparents, parents, animals. He's had no sadness in his life. I thought, God, must be nice to have no loss ever in your life. But, what was he? 13 years old, 14 years old. So I guess it made sense. So it's tough. It's tough working with kids when you're trying to give them the seeds of, can you remember how it felt about when they don't have that experience? And certainly then to take it to the next level and integrate it into training and all of that. So there's my 2 cents on the memories and experiences. That's about it. I'm going to call it quits on this feedback. I'm going to try to knock out some other feedbacks from other people's and move on to the last couple of assignments. It's been a great class.